Today is the 14th day since I began using a Freestyle Libre for the first time. Did I learn anything? Yeah, I did, and I'll share that with you today. It has been 14 days since I first put on my Freestyle Libre 14-day sensor and started scanning to determine my glucose levels. Well, it's been an interesting journey, and I've learned a few things about my own blood sugar, and of course I've learned about the Freestyle Libre system. So let's get to it, and I'll share a few of my thoughts about the experience concerning this fairly new device known as a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. My first thought is this. I knew this device would be a lot easier and more convenient than a conventional glucose meter that requires you to prick your finger, get a drop of blood, and apply it to a test strip, but I didn't realize just how much more convenient it would be. Getting a number for your glucose levels is blazing fast and super convenient. So let me just give you an example of that. I have my handy-dandy little timer here, and I'm going to time how long it takes me to get a regular glucose test using Mike the meter, and then we'll time the CGM, the Freestyle Libre. So let's begin it. First, we're going to tear open the package, put the strip into Mike, and get a drop of blood. Give it a squeeze. Well, that didn't turn out to be quite enough. Push it a little harder, do it again. There we go, we've got enough. And we will apply the strip to the blood, put it down, wipe my finger, and wait for required 5 seconds, and we've got a 103. And that was about 35 seconds it took me to do that. 35 seconds doesn't seem too bad. But the continuous glucose meter is going to be considerably faster. So let's once again set the timer at 0, and we will start it, turn it on, and all right, it's telling me I've only got 4 hours left. It's giving me a 106. All right, this says 10 seconds, but I had to fool around with the warning, which you normally don't have to do. So I would say normally it's about 5 to 6 seconds, but 10 seconds, even having to deal with that warning that comes on, has been coming on all day telling me how many hours I've got left. So the two meters were pretty close. The old-fashioned meter was at a 103. The continuous glucose monitor Freestyle Libre was at a 106. 3 points difference, not bad at all. Time-wise, it took about 35 seconds to do the old-fashioned style, 5 or 6 seconds to do the CGM. Now, I know that taking 35 seconds to test your glucose is not a huge waste of time, not at all. But still, when you can do something in 5 seconds and know that you're not going to run out of test strips, there is really no limit to how many tests you can do. And once you see for yourself just how easy, how fast, how convenient, and with no mess at all, you'll test yourself in numbers you never would with a traditional glucose meter. Sometimes this last week I've just walked past my scanner and thought, well, I wonder what my glucose is now. So I pick up the scanner, take the 5 seconds to test myself, and bam, I know what my glucose level is. Easy peasy. And that brings me to the second thought I want to share. And that is that because testing is so much easier, so much faster and more convenient, you're going to end up doing a lot more tests, and more tests equals more information. In many cases, if you're prudent and you do a lot of post-meal tests on all kinds of different foods and meals, you can learn more in 2 weeks with a CGM than you could learn in 6 months with a traditional meter. Now, it's true that you could learn just as much by taking lots and lots of regular glucose tests with that traditional meter, but due to the time involved and the knowledge that you're using up your strips, which is always in the back of my mind, I end up being much more sparing with my tests. There's always that thought that it's just not smart to waste all my test strips by doing 10 or 15 tests in a day. But with the CGM, that thought is gone. It doesn't matter how many times in a day you test yourself, you know you're good. And you get a lot of knowledge and information. And the more knowledge you gain with multiple tests, the better equipped you're going to be to keep your glucose levels under control, and the more motivated you're going to be as well. A third thought I have about this CGM is this. The technology for these continuous glucose monitors is only going to get better and better. When I first heard of the Freestyle Libre, my biggest disappointment in learning about them was when I discovered that the sensor would only last for 14 days, and then you'd have to replace it with another sensor. And at around $60 a pop, that's a pretty depressing thought. But there's research in the works among several different companies to create sensors that can last for 28 days or longer. There's even a company called Senseonics that recently received approval from the FDA on its pre-market approval application for a device containing a sensor that lasts up to 3 months before needing to be replaced. Now, that sensor will need to be implanted under the skin by a doctor. But things are only going to get better and better, and let me go on record to make a prediction here. The day will come when continuous glucose monitors will get so good, they will last for so long, and the competition among them, the different companies, will drive the prices down to such a degree that the regular, finger-pricking, old-fashioned meters will become extinct. Mike the meter is going to be out of a job, so I hope he has a strong retirement plan. When young people in days to come hear about the ancient times when you had to prick your finger and get a drop of blood and apply it to a testing strip, it's going to sound so primitive to them. But that day's not here yet, and I may not live to see it. It will come, however, I'm sure of it. For now, what most of us can and should do is to obtain one of these systems and use it occasionally, 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there, and then test ourselves like crazy while that sensor is still active, and learn as much as we can so we can make wise choices for our meals in the days to come. A fourth thought I have is that the Libre's greatest value is in identifying the safety or the danger of different meals and foods. Often, I'll only test up to 1 hour after eating a meal due to not wanting to use up all my strips. If you've watched many of my videos, I'm sure you've heard me say I tend to hit my glucose peak after 1 hour. That is 1 hour after eating. I've learned this early on, especially by testing high-carb meals. If I eat a bowl of sugary cereal or a baked potato or a drink of Coke, that's almost always the case. 1 hour is pretty much my peak. An hour after eating, my insulin will start driving my glucose back down to its base level. But that 1 hour peak is not always the case, and it's going to depend on the foods and meals that I eat. One of the things I learned during my 2 weeks with the CGM is that my wife Benedicta's okra soup and fufu gives me a much more delayed glucose peak than with most meals. I seem to hit my peak around 3 hours rather than 1 with the okra soup and fufu. Now, I've been eating this food ever since we've been married, and I never realized it created such a delayed glucose peak. But I know it now thanks to Charlie, the CGM. At 1 hour with the okra soup and fufu, my glucose is usually pretty good, but by 3 hours, it's sometimes getting close to or just a little bit over my personal limit that I allow myself of 140 milligrams per deciliter as a glucose peak. Now, Mike never told me that. It was just too much trouble to be testing it 2 hours and 3 hours and so forth normally. But with the CGM, it's so easy, so simple, and there's no extra cost at all. So I end up doing things like 3-hour post-meal tests, or sometimes 4. And to my surprise, I found that okra soup and fufu isn't quite as good for me, glucose-wise, as I thought it was. And I suspect that if you get one of these devices and do some 3 and even 4-hour post-meal tests, you may discover some surprises as well. Thought number 5 is that the reason most often given to support switching from a regular glucose meter to a CGM is probably the least and the worst reason of all to do that. And that is, people will talk about the pain of having to prick your fingers and how nice it'll be not to have to prick your fingers and have all that pain. Well, the pain of pricking my fingers has never been a big factor. And by punching the side of your finger rather than the bottom, normally there's not even much pain at all. And what pain you do experience will go away. So that's a small price to pay for getting the information you need to save your lives and to live out your days in good health without kidney failure and without constant emergency trips to the hospital. So the reason to switch is not because my poor fingers are just so miserable from all these blood pricks. The real reason you should probably consider using one of these CGMs at least occasionally, if you can afford it, is that you'll end up testing your glucose twice as much, 5 times as much, 10 times as much as you otherwise would with a traditional meter. At least that's how it is for me. I was testing myself all the time. And if knowledge is power, more knowledge is more power. And a whole lot of knowledge, you guessed it, is a whole lot of power. For the diabetic, what this means is that the more information you have about your own blood sugar levels, not my blood sugar levels, not your neighbors, but your own blood sugar levels, the more you know, the more equipped you'll be to fight this fight and win and truly beat diabetes. And most of us who are type 2 diabetics or pre-diabetics can get the information we need with a few 2-week sensors over the course of 6 months or a year, and doing a lot of testing while those sensors are active. After all, we don't eat unlimited meals. We don't eat an infinite variety of foods. For most of us, we have our certain go-to meals that we eat week after week, year after year. But too often diabetics eat in ignorance, just eating the same old thing that mama gave them when they were a kid, and they have no idea what their favorite meals and foods are doing to them. But if you can afford it, or if you've got good insurance, invest in a CGM, or else just start doing the old-fashioned prick-your-finger tests until you have thoroughly vetted your meals and foods. With some meals, you may need to make modifications, a little more of this, a little less of that. With some meals, you'll have to simply delete them from your diet altogether. And with certain foods, the same thing. For example, I never eat potatoes. Not baked potatoes, not fried potatoes, not French fries, not hash browns, not boiled potatoes. I just don't eat potatoes at all, ever, apart from a rare YouTube test. And why is it that I don't eat potatoes? Blame it all on Mike the meter. Yes, Mike has told me that they are devastating to my glucose levels. And I wouldn't care if all the world's top nutritionists all got together and came to my house and started chanting, "Eat potatoes, eat potatoes, eat potatoes." It wouldn't make any difference. I will trust my glucose meter far more than any and every nutritionist with all their degrees. And Charlie, the CGM, will do the exact same thing for you. Mike can do the job, but Charlie seems to put the process on hyperspeed. For those diabetics who can afford a continuous glucose monitor, it is a worthy investment, especially if you've just recently been diagnosed and are in the dark about the best diet for conquering diabetes, or if perhaps you've been diabetic, but you just don't have the motivation to make the changes you know you need to make. When you see those numbers showing up on your monitor again and again, it just might make the difference for you and give you the motivation you need. I want you to know that I do have another YouTube channel. It's called by my name, Dennis Pollock, and on this channel, I teach the Bible. I do short little 6- and 7-minute devotionals normally on all kinds of Bible topics. If you're having a rough week and need some encouragement, or you just want to know what does the Bible actually say, you need to check out my Dennis Pollock Bible channel. There'll be a link in the description below.